They sent the FBI after a Texas nurse. And tonight, we're going to tell you the shocking reason why. Good evening, and welcome to Texas Talkin, the only show in the Lone Star State that's basically what would happen if your loudest uncle got a camera, a microphone, and just enough followers to be a public nuisance. I'm your host, Shiloh Platts, a man who somehow went from making bad decisions in his 20s to asking hard questions of politicians in his 30s. It's been a strange ride indeed. So, folks, what kind of government sends the FBI after a nurse? No, seriously, not a drug cartel boss, not a human trafficker, not some guy stealing catalytic converters off of F-250s in Beaumont, a nurse. Because she said, hey, maybe we shouldn't be experimenting on children and billing taxpayers for it. Think about that. If a nurse at a children's hospital says, I have concerns about what we're doing to kids, your first instinct should probably be, maybe we should investigate the claims. But instead, our government said, let's investigate the nurse. That's insane. You've wandered into the twilight zone when the whistleblower becomes the villain and the people making millions off controversial medical procedures are somehow the victims. And here's the thing about courage, folks. It's easy to be brave when everybody agrees with you. It's a lot more difficult when speaking up could cost you your career, your reputation, and make federal agents show up at your front door. Most people, if we're being honest, would have looked at that situation and suddenly developed a strong desire to mind their own business. But not Vanessa Sivadge. She kept talking. She kept fighting. And whether you agree with every aspect of this debate or not, every parent in Texas should want answers when someone inside a children's hospital says something isn't right here. Because if we can't ask questions about what happens to our children, then what exactly are we allowed to ask questions about? Tonight, you're going to hear directly from the woman at the center of one of the most explosive whistleblower stories in Texas. Buckle up, because this one is going to get Texas talking. Let's get dialed in. And joining me now is the nurse at the center of one of the most shocking and explosive whistleblower stories in Texas, Vanessa Sivadge. She also happens to be the founder of Protecting Texas Children. Vanessa, welcome to Texas Talkin'. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. So if you could walk us through very briefly how you went from being a private citizen living a nice and quiet life to having the FBI show up at your front door during dinner with friends.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I never would have imagined that would be where my life would take me. But I started my career at Texas Children's Hospital many years ago and, became a pediatric nurse because I really deeply loved and wanted to care for children, to be a part of their healing journey. And that's really where I pictured myself for the rest of my career, is at this prestigious institution in caring for children. The number one hospital for children in America, if not the world, is in Houston. And I got a job there in 2018. And, everything was good at first. It was a great job, great coworkers, and really, really enjoyed, my employment and my time working on this team. But a couple years later, I transferred and I started seeing things that were deeply concerning to me in the gender clinic. Now, the hospital had made numerous statements about this gender clinic. This was in 2023 during the Biden-Harris administration, and the hospital had made numerous statements denying the existence of this gender program. They said that the program was not taking place and that there were no patients in this clinic and nothing illegal or suspicious was underway. But I was a nurse, one of many nurses working in this supposedly non-existent clinic. And it was very concerning to me because I was watching week after week as confused patients, boys and girls, teenagers, deeply confused about their identity, would walk into this gender clinic and leave with a prescription for a cross-sex hormone. And week after week, girls would start to look more and more like boys and vice versa. And their biological identities would begin to be erased, and they would start to look less and less like themselves. And that was really devastating for me, not just as a nurse who believes in medical ethics and doing no harm, first and foremost, and in the differences, biological differences between men and women, but also as a Christian and someone who believes in biblical truth in Genesis 1. And so I was in a very difficult position because I was outnumbered. I was overwhelmed. This was a huge institution, and I didn't know who to tell or how to make an impact. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up anonymously blowing the whistle in May of 2023, thinking that after I did this, I could go back to work and I could, no longer have this weight on my conscience. And thankfully, the Texas legislature, a few days after I blew the whistle anonymously with reporter Christopher Rufo, they voted to pass Senate Bill 14, which made gender modification treatments for minors illegal in Texas. And this was in 2023. So after I blew the whistle, I went back to work. No one knew my name. No one knew my identity, or so I thought. And a few months later, in July, I got a knock on my door, a knock that forever changed the trajectory of my life. The Biden-Harris administration from the Department of Justice had sent 2 FBI agents to my house. And as you said, we were in the middle of hosting dinner with friends. And all of a sudden, 2 FBI agents are knocking on my door. They flash their badges. They say they're from the FBI, and they asked to speak with me by name. And they said that they were very aware of my views against transgender medicine, and that if I did not collaborate with their investigation, if I did not cooperate with their demands, essentially, that they could not protect me and that my career and my safety were at risk. Now, that was a very terrifying encounter for me. I was just a nurse who believed in speaking what is true and upholding what is right and good and beautiful. And for me, that meant upholding God's design for male and female and the differences that make each of the sexes unique and distinct. And then all of a sudden, I have the FBI at my door threatening me and being very intimidating and coercive. And so that ultimately set the stage for my decision to go public. And a couple of months later, I discovered that the hospital, the Texas Children's Hospital, was illegally billing Texas Medicaid for the gender treatments for children.
In other words, taxpayers were funding these so-called gender transitions.
Exactly. Taxpayers unknowingly and without their consent or knowledge were funding the cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers in the state of Texas through Medicaid. And this is fraud. Plain and simple, it's fraud. And so in June of 2024, that is when I went public with my name and my identity. I revealed that the hospital was committing fraud, that they were misdiagnosing patients intentionally, and that taxpayers were footing the bill. And 2 months later, the hospital fired me and I lost my job and ultimately was blacklisted from the medical industry as a whole. And that is when I decided to launch Protecting Texas Children. And that is where I am today. We are a statewide advocacy organization working to protect childhood innocence in Texas.
And I want to talk to you about that because this seemingly unfortunate series of events, of course, the FBI knocking on your door, losing your job, this led to what you just mentioned, starting this Protecting Texas Children organization. And I want to spend some time discussing a few of your priorities. I have your legislative priorities right here because I suspect that most of our fellow Texans have no idea that many of these things are happening. And to start out, I want to ask you about something called commercial surrogacy. What is that exactly?
Yes, great question. Commercial surrogacy is a contractual arrangement where a couple hires a woman, the surrogate, to carry and deliver a baby. So it's essentially, in layman's terms, in the simplest of terms, a couple, often a same-sex couple, will hire a woman, will pay a fee, and will hire this woman to carry an embryo. And the embryo eventually, of course, is a human unborn baby. And that baby, through 9 months of pregnancy, she carries that baby. And at the moment of delivery, that woman, the surrogate, surrenders that baby over to the couple. Now, why is this problematic? First of all, it treats pregnancy and childbirth
Like a commodity. Yeah.
as a paid transaction. It is essentially a rent a womb arrangement where a couple's two men, most often it's two men, who obviously cannot procreate because biology prohibits them from procreating. So what do? They have to go outside the bounds, and they have to obtain a child through different means. And so we know that in the past, it's been proven time and time again that children thrive when they are raised by a married mother and father. And so
Thousands of years of human history back that up.
Exactly. And not only that, but we believe that children should be raised by a mother and father, but preferably their biological mother and father. The woman and the man who contributed the DNA material, the gametes, to make them. I can speak for myself. Like, I derive a tremendous sense of purpose and identity from knowing who my parents are and where they come from, my heritage, what my parents went through, the trials and the struggles that brought them together, and the story of them meeting, and all of the things that make up the family unit and the strength of the family unit. I derive a tremendous sense of identity from that, and I know that is true across the board for every child. In fact, that is why the vast majority of children who go up for adoption, and adoption is beautiful, by the way, it redeems a broken situation. That is why the vast majority of children who are adopted, over 60% of them, want to know who their mother and father are after they are adopted by a good and loving family. They still want to know the roots of where they come from.
It's a natural, almost instinctual curiosity, right?
Yes. Yes. So that is why in the state of Texas, in the 90th legislative session, we want to ban commercial surrogacy, the paid contractual arrangement where we commodify children and childbirth in Texas.
Now, there's another caveat to this, from what I understand, that quite frankly is disgusting. And that is, if the child, the child growing inside of the surrogate, if it's determined that that child has some sort of debilitating illness like Down syndrome or some other complication, often it's written contractually, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that then the surrogate would have to get an abortion. Is my understanding of that correct?
Yes, it is. In many cases, under the third party arrangement, under these surrogacy agencies, where, I mean, many people watching this may have seen a giant billboard off the side of the road that's promoting surrogacy for often very economically vulnerable women who look at this opportunity as a way to make money, right? And so that's another reason why surrogacy exploits vulnerable women, not just here in America, in a civilized Western country, but imagine even more so in a third world country where women don't have the same opportunities that they have here. Imagine what this income means for them and for their livelihood. And so to answer your question, though, yes, in the contractual agreement, it is often written, and the surrogate, the woman, doesn't have a choice in the matter. If the embryo is tested and discovered to have some sort of trisomy or Down syndrome abnormality, it's been documented time and time again in many cases in recent history where the surrogate has to abort. And so that is why surrogacy is not pro-life and it's not pro-child.
Not at all. It's tragic. So sex offenders, obtain children through surrogacy. I mean, this shocked even me. And I'm a very dialed in viewer of political discourse, news. I had no idea this was happening. But tell us more about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the best example I can point to is in 2023, didn't happen in Texas, but in Pennsylvania, there was a nationwide outrage when it was discovered that a couple, two men, started a like a GoFundMe page, a fundraiser to hire a surrogate so that they could obtain a child. Logan Riley and
I
Brandon
remember
Keith
hearing about this
Mitchell.
story now.
And again, we don't know to this day whether either of the men actually were fathered the child, right? But they went on GoFundMe. They raised a lot of money to hire a surrogate, and some online sleuths out there discovered that one of the men was a Tier 1 registered Pennsylvania sex offender.
And what does Tier
And
1 mean?
well, that's what the report said. So it just means that they were caught passing. This particular man was caught exchanging nude photos with an underage minor, and things of that nature. And so he was charged with that crime. And so 12,000 messages actually with a 16-year-old boy. And so the reason that he did this was he was the teacher. He was the chemistry teacher of this underage minor. And anyway, so a really horrific background. And this couple, this man, should have never been able to hire a surrogate to obtain a child, and yet he was. And so Pennsylvania recently, some conservative members of the Pennsylvania legislature just introduced legislation to make this type of practice illegal. And that's what Texas should do. We don't need to have a situation like that in Texas before we create laws that will protect children. We need to be proactive. We need to lead the way. And so I think that is why the practice of sex offenders not being able to hire a surrogate to obtain a child is one of our legislative priorities for next year.
I mean, that's so common sense that you would think it would be met with round bipartisan support. But, I say that, and of course, leftists will probably oppose this. One of your other priorities is to amend the definition of family in Texas adoption law. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we want to make it overwhelmingly known that the ideal family structure for a child, what is in the best interest of a child, is to be raised in a loving household where a man and a woman are united in marriage. And I know that there is tragedy, there's displacement, there is abuse that sometimes doesn't make that possible a lot of times. But whenever possible, we want to set a legislative precedent to where the Texas Family Code could be amended to say that the best interests of a child belong in a permanent adoptive home with a married mother and father. So it creates a policy preference without creating an absolute rule. And that would mean that judges and CPS, Child Protective Services in the state of Texas, would consider this preference alongside the existing best interest of the child standard. So, for example, if multiple qualified adoptive families are available, adoptive agencies could give preference to a married mother and father to place that child with the married mother and father. And so that is kind of the idea behind that. We just want to say that whenever possible, an adoption is beautiful. 3 of my siblings are adopted, so I out of Child Protective Services, my family adopted them through the foster care system. It's a beautiful thing, but we want to make sure that we elevate a child's needs above the interests of adults.
Again, what's in the best interest of the child. Now, Vanessa, the last legislative priority that your organization is advocating for that I want to ask you about is to strengthen penalties for the sexual assault of young children. What is the end goal here?
Yes, that's such a loaded legislative priority, but it's something that we've seen time and time again where the assault and often the murder of underage minors the murderers do not get justice. And so what I mean by that is there is an unfortunate loophole in Texas law that prevents murderers who murder children between the ages of 10 to 15 from obtaining the death penalty.
We just did a story about that, as you know.
Yes, yes. I think you've talked about this on your show before.
Yes, last week.
And so, I was shocked to discover that. I was shocked that justice did not carry an even hand throughout all sexual assault or murder cases, frankly. And so, to that end, last session we had a Senator Betancourt who filed legislation that would kind of end the loophole, that would make it so that murderers have the death penalty for any age of child that they murder, which is, again, very common sense. But there are so many examples of that where justice has not been even-handed and it hasn't been fair. And we need to change that in Texas.
And I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I'll share mine because this is not unprecedented in the United States. Florida has passed this law and led the way here. I believe very strongly that pedophiles should qualify for the death penalty in the state of Texas. And I think we should pass legislation to that end. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's exactly what Idaho did. I think Idaho is one of the first states that is essentially making it so that the firing squad is instituted for pedophiles. And honestly, I think it's a very popular idea. I think a lot of Republican states and legislatures are looking at that. And so I'm very much in support of that.
Vanessa, where can my viewers go if they want to follow the work your organization does? I know you're on X. I don't know if you're on Facebook, but I know you're on X, both you and your organization.
Yes, our website is protectingtexaschildren.com. There is a list of all of our legislative priorities, our initiatives. We have a huge initiative underway right now called Behind the Shelves, where we are working to remove the sexually explicit books from the public school library shelves. There are hundreds and hundreds of perverted books, and our goal is to empower parents to identify those and get them removed from the shelves. So that is something that we're currently working on right now. But you can go to our website, you can follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on X. And most importantly, please subscribe to our weekly emails because we do send weekly updates and action alerts of things that you need to know about.
Vanessa, I want to thank you for spending some time with us tonight. I very much appreciate the work that you're doing to protect our kids in Texas. I'm a father of two, and so this is very important to me as well. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Texas. Thank you for helping us keep Texas talking.
Thank you.
Stay dialed in to interviews and content just like this by clicking that follow button on my Facebook page, or hit the subscribe button to learn more about exclusive access that you won't want to miss.